Baruch
atah
Eloheinu melech haolam asher
kishon b'mitzvosav Torah.
Praise to you, Lord of God, rule of the universe, who's made us holy with your commandments and command us to busy ourselves with the words of Torah. So with that, we're still in chapter 3 of Pirkei Avot. I'm going to do a quick review of where we've been so far over the last few months, and then we'll dive into this text. So our first Mishnah says, know where you're coming from, where you're going, before whom you're going to give a destination, or give an account and a reckoning, namely to God. The second one, pray for the welfare of the government, for were not for this fear it inspires, every person would swallow their neighbor alive. Then we have the first of several texts about the importance of words of Torah and meaningful talk happening between people, and that God appreciates this, can be found there. That is true in conversation. In this mission, it says that's also true at the table. Then one who stays awake at night or wakes up at night or walks in the way alone and turns their heart to idle matters endangers their life. So the importance of sleep and paying attention to what you're doing. A text about the relationship between studying Torah versus earning a living, and what that might be like. Another text about important speech, not wasting your time on trivial matters. Give to God that which is God's, for you and everything that is yours is God's. Also, talking about a text talking about reviewing your studies versus thinking about nature and the world around you. The importance of remembering what you've studied, but if you forgot because it's too hard for you to remember, that's okay. And only if you intentionally forgot is it a problem. The fear of sin has priority over your wisdom, then your wisdom is enduring. But if your wisdom has priority over your fear of sin, your wisdom is not enduring. Ditto for good deeds versus wisdom. Good deeds are more important. And then we have one with whom people are pleased, God is pleased, and the opposite. And morning sleep, midday wine, children's talk, and sitting in the assemblies of the vulgar all ruin a person's life. So staying focused on the priorities. And that if you shame your fellow human being publicly, then even if you know lots of Torah and do lots of good deeds, you do not have a share in the world to come. And now we get to this text. So, Abba, would you please read from what Rabbi Ishmael said?
Be compliant to a supervisor, affable with your juniors, and receive every person with a cheerful face. Biography. Rabbi Ishmael ben Elisha lived in the village of Aziz, just south of Hebron. Gideon 6:4. Once a poor, bedraggled young woman came to him and said that her fiancé had taken a vow to not marry her because she was displeasing to look at. Rabbi Ishmael took care of her, gave her food and new clothes, and made sure that she regained her health. Then he summoned her fiancé and asked, "Did you vow not to marry such a beautiful woman?" "No. In that case, your vow is now annulled." After they got married, Rabbi Ishmael commented, "The daughters of Israel are beautiful, but poverty disfigures them." From Nedarim 66a. Rabbi Ishmael sought to develop systems for textual interpretation and came up with 13 rules. A well-known example of this is Kal v'chomer, how much more so, or a fortiori in Latin. For instance, if you should dress nicely in synagogue on Shabbat, Kal v'chomer, you should certainly dress nicely in synagogue on Yom Kippur, even more nicely. You can find Rabbi Ishmael's rules of textual interpretation in many Sidurim today, toward the beginning of the morning service. They're quoting from Sephra 1. For the crime of teaching Torah, Rabbi Ishmael was killed by the Romans during the Hadrianic persecutions after the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135. He is one of the 10 martyrs referenced in the martyrology service every Yom Kippur. We know this from Avot to Rabbi Natan 38:3. Seeing him in a dream was considered an omen of calamity because of this, from the tractate Brachot 57b in the Babylonian Talmud. How are these sayings relevant to our lives today? Well, I will vouch for the fact that I have said Kal v'chomer many times in my lifetime to people who actually understood the lingo, because it's a very tight way of saying all the more da-da-da-da-da.
Thank you. So Kal v'chomer, and also the sayings from Rabbi Ishmael, be compliant to a supervisor, affable with your juniors, and receive every person with a cheerful face. How are these sayings relevant to our lives today?
Seems like a nice way to deal with, or good advice for dealing with your coworkers.
This way of approaching people might also just be more harmonious in general. First impressions mean a lot, and it might, especially in maybe a situation that might be very tense, it might sort of help with that by just being, I guess, kind in terms of receiving people with a cheerful face.
Mm-hmm.
Could also be used to get brownie points, which is not a positive thing necessarily, more of a self-serving. So that's another-
Best way to get along at work. Keep your boss happy. Be agreeable to your juniors that can help you when you need something, and make people feel comfortable in your presence. It's a lot easier to convince people if you're pleasant with them, instead of being confrontational. It works for me when I remember.
Hopefully in a world without masks,
Yeah,
people can see you smile,
right.
and maybe that'll make a difference in the world.
Does this mean that you should not disagree with your supervisor if you sense something is wrong?
No, wouldn't mean that you don't yell at him. you don't curse him, and you just accept. You're nicer.
You're obsequious.
Well,
Like,
You don't tell him he's wrong, you tell him there's a better way.
That's good.
you can make suggestions, but he makes the decisions. Or they, or whoever the supervisors, let me not specify gender.
Good point.
The Torah was ahead of itself.
If it helps, the text in Hebrew says, "Heve kal l'rosh," and kal in modern Hebrew is translated as easy. So be easy with a supervisor.
And with happiness.
How does that play into the question of when you think a supervisor is wrong?
Repeat that, David. What did you say? Wednesday?
Yeah, the text literally says be easy with a supervisor.
Easy. Okay.
So how does that affect the question of what to do when you think a supervisor is wrong?
Well, what somebody just said, you present it in a nicer, kinder way rather than just say you're wrong. Say, I have a suggestion, if you would like to hear it.
And well, also, I mean, if whatever the supervisor finally decides you should receive, if you're going to be compliant, to it with a cheerful face and get on with it and keep him happy, or him or the supervisor happy. I'm sorry, because my supervisor right now is a he, so I tend to be thinking of him. Probably, I would say that in other situations I may have had, much more responsible positions that he has now, but I'm working for, keeping him happy. When I keep him happy, he's happy, and then that keeps me happy the way, because he as well is affable with his juniors. So it's a mutual way of managing things and being able to do something. And I'm not saying that doesn't necessarily have to be work.
I have a point.
Yeah.
We're about to finish the book of Shemot. And as we were leaving it, I started doing a little bit reminiscing, if you will, about earlier parashot. And I'm reminded of God and Moshe at the bush that didn't burn. and he cautions Moshe to be respectful of Pharaoh, even though Pharaoh is enslaving our people. So when someone is in position, I took from this the idea that we be respectful to people in positions, and we find a way to disagree with them, if that's what we're doing, to approach it with a respectful manner, with all due respect, et cetera, et cetera. That it's pretty much, we're given examples to do this. This is wise advice, and we can learn from these guys.
It's good advice to be that way with your equals as well as your superiors, because the fellow who is your equal today, or the woman, might very well be your supervisor tomorrow, and you don't want to offend them now because they'll take it out on you later.
Yes.
Yeah.
David, you mentioned the kal. I think you said that modern Hebrew, it means easy. You didn't particularly say what it meant in the Mishnah, but and then there's this word Noach, which I think which is translated here as it's the way you should be with your youngers, with your juniors. Affable. So they're both ways of being what, easy or not pushing yourself in the wrong way, or I need a little more of a clue, I think.
Yeah.
I know Kal from Kal V'chomer, but I'm not even sure it's the same word, but I think it is.
It's spelled the same.
Yeah, that's all I know. Yeah.
Noah is comfortable, again, in modern Hebrew. It's also the name of the character Noah in the and I'm quickly looking to see what the Bible says about why he gets that name. But I think it says that he will be a comfort to us yes. And Lamech named his son Noah, or Noach, saying, this one will provide us relief from our work and from the toil of our hands. So from that angle, it could be comfortable. There are other translations that interpret this as understanding. So be understanding with your juniors. It all circles around the same ballpark of like, get along well and don't make life too hard for the people that work for you or are younger than you.
Well, I don't see how Noah gave relief to the people around him. They all drowned.
Right. So the rabbis, yes, the rabbis looked at that and they're like, what did Noah do to give relief to people? And they said, oh, he was the one that invented the plow. So he made our work of farming easier. So that was their midrashic interpretation to explain how he got his name. Other thoughts on this text?
You have the part in there about if you dress well on the Sabbath, you should dress better on Yom Kippur when you go to the synagogue.
Mm-hmm.
There's a long-standing tradition that everybody wears a white gown or white robe on Yom Kippur, so nobody looks any better than anybody else.
Yes.
Doesn't seem to fit what's said here.
So I think the idea here is that if you dress appropriately for synagogue on Shabbat, then kal v'chomer, how much more so, should you dress appropriately for synagogue on Yom Kippur? And appropriately for synagogue on Yom Kippur might mean wearing all white, or might mean not wearing leather shoes. It doesn't mean that you put on your second best, but better than all your other clothes suit on Shabbat and your very best suit on Yom Kippur. But it means that if you are in a community where one does not come to shul in jeans on Shabbat, then kal v'chomer, all the more so in your community, you would not come to shul in jeans on Yom Kippur.
Well, I guess that's why when I was a child, all the women used to come to shul on the hot Yom Kippur days in their first stoles,
Right.
kept them on in the shul, and fainted every 5 minutes.
That's right. Or everybody.
No
did
air
that house
conditioning,
too.
and the windows are very small.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's funny. Yeah, the dress code has definitely changed over the years, especially since the pandemic.
It's a common thread between these items: be compliant with your supervisor, or respectful, affable with your juniors, pleasant, find a way of being respectful of them, not looking down on them, at least not giving them the impression that you see them at a lower level, even though there's an employment tier. That doesn't necessarily mean that one's being is better than another's. And finally, with every person, show a cheerful face. It seems to me the common thread is something similar to make the world a better place with each other, get along, respect the other guy, whether he's higher or lower, or you, same as you in the employment chain, or in society, or even a stranger. Let's be respectful. Let's make it an easier place for all of us. Or so it seems to me.
Yeah. That is certainly a level of textual interpretation for Pirkei Avot when you've got multiple things in one rabbi saying, like thinking about how do these things connect with each other. Let's look at the next text. Paul, would you read this text, please?
Rabbi Akiva said, merriment and frivolity accustom one to sexual licentiousness, Tradition is a fence that is a protection to the Torah. Tithes, a fence to wealth. Vows, a fence to abstinence. A fence to wisdom is silence. Biography. Rabbi Akiva was the shepherd of Kalba Savua. Kalba Savua's daughter fell in love with Akiva and offered to marry him on the condition he went and studied Torah. Akiva agreed. Kalba Savua was so upset by this that he disowned his daughter. That winter, they stayed in someone's barn. Rabbi Akiva picked straw out of his wife's hair and said, "If I had the money, I would buy you a Jerusalem of gold, a type of crown." She sent him off to study with Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. He was 40 years old and had to start learning the alphabet. He stayed for 12 years. When he came back, he overheard someone asking his wife, "How long will you effectively stay a widow?" She replied, "If Akiva should hear me, he should study another 12 years. Okay, thought Rabbi Akiva, and he went off for another 12 years. When he came back, Rabbi Savua heard there was a great rabbi in town. He felt bad that he had disowned his daughter and came to the rabbi to get it annulled. "If you had known that your daughter would be that the husband would become learned, would you have disowned your daughter?" asked Rabbi Akiva. "No, I'm your daughter's husband. Your vow is annulled." Rabbi Kalba Savua was very grateful and gave the couple half his money.
Yeah.
One of Rabbi Akiva's students became sick, and Rabbi Akiva went to visit him. Since nobody was taking care of him, Rabbi Akiva and his other students took care of the sick one. Upon getting better, the student remarked, "My teacher, you have given me a new life." Rabbi Akiva then taught, "One who does not visit the sick is like one who sheds blood." Rabbi Akiva's daughter married Shimon ben Azai on the condition that he started learning Torah. At her wedding reception, her hairpin was bothering me, so she stuck in a hole in the wall. The next day, she took it out and there was a dead snake attached to it. "My daughter, that snake would have killed you. What did you do to merit such a good outcome?" During the celebration, a poor person knocked on the door. Everyone was having a good time and nobody heard him except for me. I opened the door and gave him my own plate of food. This is an example of what it says in Proverbs: charity will save from death. Rabbi Akiva was a supporter of the Bar Kokhba rebellion. In the Hadrianic persecution that followed, Jews were not allowed to teach Torah. Papos ben Yehuda saw Rabbi Akiva teaching Torah and said, "Are you not afraid of the Romans?" Rabbi Akiva answered, "We are like fish who are afraid of the fishermen." When a fox invited them to get away from the fishermen by coming on land, they retorted, if they weren't safe in the water, how much more would they be of danger away from the water? The Torah is our water. Rabbi Akiva was caught by the Romans and they put him to death by raking his flesh with iron combs.
Mhm.
He started to say the Shema, and the students asked him about this. He responded by saying that he'd often wondered when he could love God with his soul, even with his soul, and now that his soul was being taken from him, he had his opportunity. He died while saying Echad. Rabbi Akiva's advice to his son included the following: don't walk barefoot and make sure to eat breakfast. How are these sayings relevant to our lives today?
All right.
After all that, don't eat breakfast and don't walk barefoot.
We had a practical mindset.
Sure did.
Sounds like a lot of mothers that I know.
Yeah,
Don't walk barefoot. You might cut your foot on glass,
right.
and eat breakfast.
That's right.
I think at least talking about tradition as a fence has a lot of relevancy to today, especially because Torah is a living thing that exists even today. So those fences are still relevant even now. Like, for example, the different objects that are muktzeh or forbidden to be touched on the Sabbath, those would be still relevant because to a degree, they still help protect people from actually violating the Sabbath by having sort of an extra offense around certain things that could be used to violate it. So, yeah, that's how I thought it was relevant.
Nice, thank you.
I always thought that you put up one fence to protect the Torah. Then maybe you want to put up a second fence to protect yourself from the first fence so that you don't violate that first fence to get to the Torah. Or something to that effect. I mean, how far do you go putting up fences? Put up enough fences, you never know what the Torah has to say.
That's a good point.
If Solomon's decided to remain silent as a fence to his wisdom, do we know anything about him today?
Yeah, what do people think about that last one? Offense to wisdom is silence.
Maybe because the best thing is to say, rather say nothing than say the wrong thing. Think before you speak.
We have 2 ears and we have 1 mouth. So we need to listen twice as much as we talk, because when you talk, you can say something you can't take back.
Both good.
I think that I agree actually with the last part, especially because offenses being a wisdom of silence, especially because certainly there's a time and a place for certain things like this. And there's also, I guess, depending on what kind of knowledge it is, what kind of wisdom it is, it may not be particularly useful in a certain scenario as well. So I don't know. That's kind of how I thought about it.
David, what's the word for
If
fence
you
here?
have a fence of silence,
Showing my lack of
and
Hebrew.
impart knowledge to others. And isn't that part of how we learn and how we contribute our knowledge, is by talking about what we know or what our opinions are and sharing them and discussing. And it just seems like, if you don't say anything, you're not going to get any feedback. You're not going to learn. You're not going to grow. Just kind of going to be stuck. And, you may think you have wisdom, but you may not.
Why do you think that silence means that you shouldn't speak, rather than you being in a quiet place, so then you can contemplate and become wise and think about it without distractions?
Interesting.
Well, if silence is receiving as opposed to giving, if you're not receiving, you're still not growing. You're not learning. I mean, one is you are the giver of information or knowledge or opinion, and one is you're receiving it. Either way, silence stops that.
But again, I'm saying then it's worth considering. I'm just being the devil's advocate, because I see I understand what you're saying. Just to provoke, because I look at it, then we're just the way we were looking at it, it's just somebody, you speaking or somebody else speaking, but there's other ways of transmitting or obtaining wisdom without necessarily through the audio means, let's say. Be visual or just contemplating or reading or observing. So, I mean,
I want to suggest you take a look at the common thread here again too.
right.
Okay, there's a repetition of the word in English fence. David is the word siag.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, a fence doesn't necessarily have to be a barrier. I'm thinking that the fence is possibly it's a, I mean, you have wooden fences with slat space. You have chain fences. And neighbors talk over fences. They don't have to be, a fence doesn't have to be so high that you can't see over it or even see at it. Mechitza should be nice, but fences can be something where people gather and talk over neighbors, right?
Right, or see through.
Or see through. So a fence doesn't have to be a barrier. A fence can be a place where there's give and take. It shows a boundary, which can be taken as a form of respect. We should respect boundaries, but we don't. But sooner or later, sometimes we have to cross over them, or sometimes somebody else has to cross over them. There's give and take here. There's ways to interpret this, and and none of these things are bad or wrong in and of themselves. It's how we love them, how we perform them, how we perform them properly or overdo them or underdo them. It's room for interpretation.
Thank you.
Mm.
What do you guys think about tithes as a fence to wealth?
Good. Tithes can potentially lead to tzedakah or good giving, good fiscal operation. Loving wealth is not good. Using your wealth for good is good. I kind of built that in there. I'm sorry. Using your wealth for productivity, for giving to the poor, for donations in the right places. There is a good that wealth can do. It's the love of the wealth that is the negative.
Okay. Other thoughts about this text or about this phrase?
Oh, if tithe is really 10% of your wealth and your wealth only earns 5% interest, then eventually you're going to cut into the amount of wealth that you have.
Hmm.
I think it's a difficult question to see the logic of the fence in these different contexts. So I probably have this wrong, but the first one that we are most familiar to most of us, certainly, that the rules of the oral law are a fence around the Torah, gives you less of it restricts the zone in which you might violate the core rules. It's very much a legal idea that lawyers use of an abundance of caution. So at least it's related to that idea. So you're safer from violation of the central rules if you make other rules around them that aren't as weighty, but that you respect as well, or that you respect. But when it comes to the other examples, they seem to have a different logic. Like the tithes, perhaps you understand that it just maximizing your gain is not the end. And so you actually become more sober in your or prudent in your practices, perhaps. I don't know what the I'd like to know what the commentaries say about that. And for the abstinence, well, I've talked too long, but you can work out a logic.
And how do the two pieces go together? Nobody's taken on the merriment and frivolity accustomed one to sexual licentiousness. I mean, he began with that. So if you lead a life where you're just out having a good time and engaging in activities that are going to lead you to do things that aren't very good, let's say, because then the next piece is so far different than those first two sentences. I mean, they're more serious, I think is what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
So then let me ask you the question. I'm thinking about fence. Is the fence to keep you from the Torah or to keep you close to it?
That's a good point.
I mean, what is the fence? How do you understand the fence? Because if it's around, is it around? And which side of the fence are you on?
If I can contribute one thing from Rabbi Gordon Tucker, who was actually someone with whom I interacted at JTS and again at Camp Ramah. In his commentary for Lev Shalem, the new conservative one, he says that rather than silence, he says avoiding gratuitous speech and keeping one's counsel are protections for wisdom, as opposed to outright silence. That doesn't answer the challenge about what does all this have to do with licentiousness, but I thought it was interesting that he wasn't really in favor of the silence as a literal translation of shatika, but rather simply avoiding gratuitous speech, talking for just to hear yourself talk.
A thought comes to my mind. Go ahead. Somebody gonna say something?
Go ahead, Barry.
I was thinking about the time around the golden calf. It was a very serious time. It started off being serious. We were a scared people. We miscalculated the descendants of Moshe down from the mountain. The fear was that he died and we needed a leader, and that we needed another God. We coerced Aaron before he was a Kohen, but we coerced Aaron. We were looking for a God, we were looking for something as a guide of life. Excuse the golden calf was the wrong way to do it, obviously, but we were looking for something that we thought we had lost, that we feared that it was taken from us or lost from us. And it turned into, we went from a seriousness to a party to licentiousness. And it's one word leads to another, one step leads to another. I think that's what that gets to. If you don't stop the degree, it's okay. We just saw just a few minutes ago before that to be comfortable, to be respectful, to be affable, to have a smiley face. But the lesson here is, in the compare and contrast is, don't go too far. There are boundaries. The fence is a two-way element here. See through it, go look over it. That we need to not take things beyond their proper limits. Everything has my dad used to say, happy mediums, respect the mediums. That's what I think these are getting here too. The being so merriment, so frivolous that it goes too far. Being either too zealous or not zealous enough from the Torah. We see off and on during the Torah. Don't deviate to the right or to the left. Stay on my path. Stay on the road. wealth, the love of wealth, not using wealth properly and using tzedakah and building constructive and productive things with your wealth, but to love it and covet it. Same thing with vows and abstinence, same thing with wisdom and silence.
So, so I'm thinking here, merriment and frivolity, custom on the sexual licentiousness. Maybe he's trying to point, this is a situation or a consequence, and maybe you have to have a fence between merriment and frivolity, so you don't be a limit. So then you don't become accustomed, or you have the tithes or the payments or contributions that keep you from accumulating it. If you take 10 or 15 or 20%, 30% with different tithes, then that reduces your wealth and it keeps you from just being, I don't know if blinded or so only occupied without having some of what you've accumulated or harvested. You share that with the community. If the tithes are something beneficial for the community. And vows is a fence to abstinence. It shouldn't, I think that keeps you closer to it. And that says, I think it limits you from going too far, that you get too far from abstinence. And then you fall into too much merriment and frivolity. If you're abstaining from something. So what's the measure? I'm just thinking, I'm just imagining, well, what does it mean? Well, how would you apply it? And why does it make sense to have mentioned merriment and frivolity and with accustomed then to leading to licentiousness? And well, then you would seem to need a fence if you want to avoid going to an extreme where you're in a sinful situation.
Yeah, that's good, Charles, because if you do all those things, then you won't get into trouble with too much merriment and frivolity.
Yeah, it could be, right? If you stay close to the Torah and you contribute in a positive way to the community. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Makes sense to me too.
Is there a possible, I can't shed light on that very interesting question, but is there a possible literary connection between number 12 and number 13? Where in 12, the yielding to the superior, it says kal larosh, okay, lightness of the head or whatever that is. And then I see in number 13, Mishnah 13, the levity or sexual licentiousness, if I have this right, is, or maybe it's the other way around, is kalut rosh, which sounds like a plural of that, acts of lightness, or I'm not sure if that's levity or it's sexual, or do I have that all? Oh, I think that's what they're intending here. I'm looking at different translation, but it seems that he's playing with the same phrase, and whoever edited it pulled them together.
Yeah, let's look at that. So, oh, this is interesting. So what I'm picking up is when it says in the first text we looked at, be compliant to a supervisor, that was kal lerosh, compliant to one that is your head. Whereas here the word for frivolity is kalut rosh, easiness of your head. And so it's different, but the fact that it's very much the same words being used in different ways, I think is absolutely spot on, Phil. That's why these two texts are put next to each other.
Is the kalut in the second phrase, is that an abstract noun form from the kal with the ut there? I may be way off here. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a grammatical noun form. easiness of head.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Yep.
How much are we really missing by not, at least I have not being able to read it and grasp it in Hebrew? There certainly must be plays on words and sounds in some of this from one place to another.
Point.
And we're missing that. At least those of us like myself who doesn't, well, I have minimal rudimentary knowledge of Hebrew, so
You're singing to me, Charles.
It's said that that the Talmud is an ocean. There's a book, Swimming in the Sea of Talmud. And so while there are depths to be plumbed when looking at the Hebrew, there is certainly plenty to be explored even within looking at the English and thinking about its relevance to our lives today.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's why I come every Monday I can, because you're stretching my brain and my thinking.
Where does humor fit into Akiva's thoughts here?
I think humor is okay when used, when not taken too far or used within kosher limits. So if you are using humor to lead you down a road towards sexual licentiousness, then Rabbi Akiva would probably not be in favor of this. But if you are using humor to lead you in other directions, then I think Rabbi Akiva would be fine with it. And Rabbi Ishmael would say that humor, I would guess, that humor can help you in your relationships with your supervisors and your juniors, and how you greet people in general. It's a good question.